I'm wanting to start out by emphasising that people throughout the world are not likely different to Australians. This is the country which most thoroughly surveys public attitudes towards drugs. Here are the results of the last 2019 nationwide survey of 25,000 Australians, which you can see in the table on your screen. 99% do not give their approval to heroin use. 99% do not give approval to ice and speed use. 98% cocaine, 96% ecstasy, 80% cannabis. Now, it is very safe to say that Australians will thereby want less of these drugs in their society, not more. And those attitudes won't be too different in other Western countries. So, does decriminalisation deliver less drug use or more drug use? That is the crucial question. The US was the first to get things started with cannabis decriminalisation in the 70s. In the US, Oregon was the first to decriminalise, with cannabis use increasing in the first year amongst 18 to 29-year-olds by 12%, against slight decreases across the rest of the US that year. California was the next in 1975 with increases of 15% against US increases of 1%. You can check that on the next slide. Imagine if these were increases in cigarette use for these age groups. Public health authorities would be alarmed and spring into action. And those two states got the ball rolling, with 11 states decriminalising in the 3 years thereafter, which increased US use by 8%. What a mistake. Here's that slide I mentioned, and you can check cannabis use for all US states. While we're here, it shows the success of President Reagan's Just Say No drug prevention program, which started in 1980. Cannabis use decreases by more than half across all age groups over the following decade, even though it was a program more so for school kids. Now, Google these 4 words: just say no and the word failure. Just say no, failure. 4 words, and you'll see the many outright lies which are told about that very successful prevention measure. So in Australia, South Australia decriminalised cannabis in 1987 and in the ACT in 1992. And this official graph measures increased use of those who had previously tried cannabis. Well, notice that the ACT skyrockets from negligible use in 1998 to 30+%, and it's on a similar trajectory to South Australia, where there are no surveys, of course, before 1998, but you can see where it's coming from. Eventually, use settles at the same levels as for New South Wales and Victoria, 2 states that had battled cannabis trafficking for years before. The UK decriminalised in 2004 and recriminalised in 2009. So I've reproduced the opening lines from the Independent's apology in 2007, recognising that the decriminalisation that they had promoted in 1997 had had awful consequences by 2007. We've already, in our first episode, covered Portugal. What made it different to cannabis decriminalisation was that it decriminalised the use of all illicit drugs. And drug use went up by 60% across all age groups, as you can see there, but it also went up to this peak here, 60% again, for high school minors. That's the very age group that you never want using drugs. Australia's tough on drugs over here, by comparison, decreased use by 42% with the threat of criminal sanctions. Taking Portugal's failure as their lead, California decriminalised all drug use in 2015. And the centrist Forbes magazine tells of the debacle it has created in that state. It tells of out-of-control drug use feeding and creating the homelessness problem there. It says these words: the 44,000 people living, eating and defecating on the streets of LA have brought rats and medieval diseases, including typhus. Garbage is everywhere. Experts fear the return of cholera and leprosy. And then the tie-up between drugs and homelessness, down the bottom, it says most of the time what people mean by the homelessness problem is really a drug problem and a mental illness problem. So great is this drug policy debacle that people are leaving the state in droves, to the point that California will lose a seat in Congress. In Oregon, which decriminalized the use of all drugs in 2021, deaths from opiate use had more than tripled by the end of 2022, which is 2 years later, meaning that opiate use had similarly more than tripled. We have dealt with that equation in other series on this channel. Now, 56% of surveyed Oregon residents want decriminalization repealed, demonstrating what all decriminalized drug policy regimes should be doing. People want less drugs, not more. In our next episode, we'll go into the mechanics of why decriminalization can never work, with the first of 3 episodes specifically addressing pro-decriminalisation arguments coming from the Australian Uniting Church.